All right, the next item on our discussion today is the water resource outlook.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll bring up our guests, Marc Catlin and probably Dave Bries too from our utilities department. I think if you want to sit down here, maybe we can, if that works. We'll find a spot. We're used to work sessions around a table, so we're still adapting to the new world. So we have State Representative Marc Catlin joining us here. Thanks for joining us. It's kind of by happenstance, he was talking to Bill. Said, "Hey, what do you guys got going on?" And says, "Oh, we're talking about water." And turns out, Marc is the guy when it comes to water. Mike Berry is the other guy when it comes to water, and then Dave Bries, our utility superintendent. So, kind of assembled a team to talk about where we're at and some of the things we're facing. With development interest picking up in western Colorado, I guess the West in general. There's been a lot of press on the Colorado River and all of the challenges that it's currently facing. We've been getting a lot of questions about water resources, our water resource outlook, and what it looks like for us, both locally and regionally. So I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of have a discussion, prime council, kind of educate you guys and the citizens on some of the things that are going on and what it means for us, and go from there. So I got a short presentation. I'm going to try and condense 100 years of problems into 5 minutes on the Colorado River. Let me see if I can get the share to work here. Just 1 second. I have a 50% chance of it working. There we go. Okay. So, with the introduction, I'll go quickly over the Colorado River system. I'll go also over our local water supply. Hopefully we can do all of that collectively in about 5 minutes or so. And then I wanted to spend most of the time talking about the future outlook, which I think is where a lot of the discussion with Mike and Marc's expertise will come in handy. So, and if anybody got to enjoy that water with your lunch thing on plummeting Powell, so some of this may be duplicate from some of the material you saw there. I stole some of their slides just because changes by the day, so it's good to get the most recent without having to make my own spreadsheets. So thanks to the Colorado River District for some of this information you'll see. So I'm going to talk in Big River first. So this is the Colorado River watershed. The Colorado River District is highlighted there in blue. All of its tributaries, all these various rivers that feed into the Colorado River system. The little teacup looking things are the major buckets on that system. So as you've heard, Lake Powell and Lake Mead are dangerously low. That between the two of them, there's about 50 million acre feet of storage. They're about 30% of that. A couple other unique things. So, obviously in Montrose, we are tributary to the Colorado River. We drain into the Uncompahgre, which drains into the Gunnison, which joins the Colorado. But beyond this watershed, you can see all these shaded areas that are actually outside of the watershed that rely on Colorado River water. Total, there's about 40 million people or so that rely on this system. They get it out of the system through transbasins diversions, really complicated network. Central Arizona product is a big pumped canal, or pumps up and then runs down, kind of our series of pump stations. It's a very large, complex system, 100 plus years in the making. Thinking of, the reservoirs, there are savings accounts. So the idea is when you have years of excess, that water stays in there and you can throttle it out and use it up over the rest of the year. The problem is our savings accounts are getting relatively low. So low that the Bureau is now trying to preserve some of the water levels in Lake Powell. You may have heard they're doing kind of surges coming out of the 3 upstream buckets to Powell, Flaming Gorge, Blue Mesa, and Navajo. So Blue Mesa will be dropping another 8 to 10 feet. Or actually, I think the latest projection was 96 feet down going into the winter, if that sounds right. Looking at the latest Bureau forecast, so very low. And kind of a sense of just, that's unprecedented. Those actions, I think, came under the recent drought contingency plan, some of the drought contingency planning stuff, but tells you kind of how bad it's getting. They're trying to maintain Powell at a certain level for 2 reasons. One is to maintain power generation. You get so low that you can't or can no longer efficiently produce power. That power is important to repay a lot of the revenue generated from that power pays for a lot of these water projects, which do support us in the west. The second is it gets low enough and you just do not have enough head on the outlet works to deliver your obligations to the downstream lower basin, which I'll go into here in a little bit. So, they're doing those releases. I think one of the big, we're in uncharted territory. One of the big questions on that is how much of that will actually reach Powell and how effective will that be? And there's unfortunately not a lot of gauges on the river or in certain places to really quantify that either. So getting into uncharted territory on the larger system. I'm going to geek out about the Colorado River Compact for a minute. So you have the upstream basin and the lower basin. The split is Lee's Ferry, which is right below Glen Canyon Dam. So Lake Powell was built for the upper basin to try and preserve our ability to store some of that water and meet our obligations to the downstream users. On paper, the lower basin is allocated, 7.5 million acre feet under the general initial compact, and then these other uses, some go to Mexico, some for tributary use, collectively 7.5, 8.5 plus Mexico. So, and then we get 7.5 million acre feet. Unique element about what we get is we have to make the obligations to the downstream users. 90% of the water is upstream, 90% of the people are downstream. Our obligations to the downstream users, they get theirs first, more or less. And so if there's a shortage, we're kind of eating that up, because kind of no matter what, some people call it a guarantee. I think that's a debated word, but and there's some provisions under some recent legislation that change a little bit of that, but for the most part, we're obligated to deliver water downstream. They get their water first, and we're left holding the bag as their supply issues, which we'll get into here soon. So the number to remember from this is there's 17.5 million acre feet of water allocated off of the Colorado River system. I carry that number again when we start comparing that to supply. So that's what's allocated on paper. This is what's actually being used. So on the upper basin, we were entitled to the 7.5 million acre feet. We're only using 4 to 4.5. So there's room to spare there. However, downstream, they're using more than their allocation, and that's depends on who you ask, and I'm not going to get into the lawyerness of all of that. Maybe Marc might want to talk about that, but there's different things as far as evaporation counting or not counting in the lower basin, tributary contributory flows counting or not counting, all these kind of nuances. One thing is, you get into the water world, there's 100 layers to every single problem. So I'm trying to keep it brief. I won't go into that. But at the end of the day, we're already using, depending on the year, 16 to 17.5 million acre feet of water off of the Colorado River system. And another takeaway is that the upstream basin isn't using all of their allocation, and we're still facing shortages. And then on top of that, there's projects in the work to further develop the upper basin. So there's that big Yampa project. They were looking to take water off of the Yampa River and divert east. Upstream, St. George in Utah is looking to pipe water from Lake Powell down to St. George area. Big contentious thing, because is that water there to develop? And that's a whole nother discussion, a whole nother layer. We could spend an hour on any of these slides, so I apologize for the brevity, but I want to give Marc and Mike some time. So that's the paper side and the use side. This is the supply side. So this is a chart showing the natural flows at Lee's Ferry of the Colorado River going back to 1875. So some of these are gauge data. Some of the previous ones, hydrologists do their magic and reestablish some of these historic flows. So, remember those numbers, the 17.5 million acre feet. The river, that's about right here of kind of total use, pretty high line. On this chart, this gray line is a pretty important line. It's the 10-year running average of flows. So you can see when the 1922 compact was established, there was a lot of water in the river, and abnormally kind of wet time. People thought they weren't allocating all of it. They were going to have some to spare. The scientists and hydrologists were looking at the history at that time and said, no, it's really more like down here. Science didn't win at the time, and they allocated that full 17.5 million acre feet. despite the river. So then if you even look at the longer term running average, this orange line, the river consistently produces about 15 million acre feet. In the initial days of the Colorado River and development of the West, that wasn't an issue because there weren't as many people here. But over time, use just keeps going up and up and up and up. And then supply is going down. So you can see the long-term running average, that supply is dropping. Even more alarming, this yellow line is the last 20-year average. So you're about 12 to 13 million acre feet produced, at the system at our obligation point, Lee's Ferry, and 17.5 million acre feet being used. So back to the financial model, you can only spend more than you make for so long, and your savings account will run out, and that's what we're approaching. What's that mean for Lake Powell? This is the Bureau's latest projections for Powell. Kind of the crap level is 35-25 elevation. It's projected almost certainly to meet that next spring. That's the elevation where minimum power pool is 3490. So they've kind of set this 35-25 as a target where anything below that, we've really lost our cushion. That system is pretty vulnerable, and we're approaching that. You might get lucky, you might have a really good year, but even with that, you're dangerously close to that line.
Scott, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
On the previous slide where you showed that 10-year average on the yellow line, is there any other period of 10 years that matches that, or is this a new?
So if you look at the 10-year running average here, so you can see how it dropped down to the line. So the gray line is that 10-year running average.
Okay.
So maybe right here you'd have
okay.
10 years in there, maybe. But beyond that, I'm not aware of. And your records start getting, a little more recreated as you get further into the past.
Okay, thank you.
And then, an important point here too is that this is not a single season problem. So, they talk about drought and impact on crops and stuff, but this is, we're in a 30+ million acre foot hole in the Colorado River system, and that's been 20+ years in the making. The last time Powell was full was right before this dry period, so it was the 1990 something, at least 20 years. So a really good snowpack year would help. A really good monsoons help kind of reduce irrigation diversions late season. But I think the models say 10 years of epically wet hydrology is what would be required to get there, and it's looking like that's not. In the foreseeable future, the models don't indicate that that's going to be the case. So that's the Colorado River system. Do you want me to dive into the local stuff and then talk, or do you guys want to say anything about that at this point? Okay, I'll talk about our local system next then. A little happier picture than the Colorado River system. So as a reminder how this system works, so there's Project 7 is the water treatment authority that was created back in the 76. To kind of pool our resources and have a common treatment entity. They deliver water to 6 different districts. Were there 7 at the beginning? Is that why it was called Project 7? Or this one leave room?
7th was the town of Ridgeway originally.
Oh, okay.
And they dropped out, and so they replaced them with the Uncompahgre Valley water users because they're the raw water provider to the
Gotcha.
6.
Okay, so there's still 7 players at the table. Yep. Dave's on that board. So these are the different water districts. So we're relatively small, but we're the largest user here, city of Montrose. So we watch Ridgeway Reservoir. So Ridgeway Reservoir was built in the 80s. Tri-County is the operator of Ridgeway Reservoir. We lease our raw water from Tri-County. Those lease payments are what repay the debt obligation to construct the Dallas Creek project, which is Ridgeway Reservoir. It's a relatively new system. We don't get our water from Ridgeway currently. So what we do is this water, because where it is hydraulically in the system, is of value to the water users. So Uncompahgre Valley water users uses water out of Ridgeway to irrigate, by gravity through their system. In exchange, they give us water out of the Gunnison via the Gunnison tunnel. So the Blue Mesa, think Blue Mesa system, Currituck County, all that, feeding into the Gunnison tunnel. which goes into the South Canal, which goes into Fairview Reservoir, which then goes to the Product 7 treatment plant. And the way they do that is you have a 1-for-1 exchange. So for every water of or every acre foot of irrigation water that they can use out of, or we can give to water users out of Ridgeway, they give us a proportional amount out of the Gunnison system. Let's see.
Quick question on it, Scott. With our sanitation plant, we're having to clean water up pretty good and put it back into the river. Do we get any credit for what we replace?
Nope. So, yeah, there's consumptive uses and non-consumptive uses. Generally, you know, household municipal uses end up back in the river, back into the system, which is great. We don't get that credited back by any means. It's, you know, our use is at the point of diversion to the treatment plant, and then that water just goes downstream. You know, what comes out of the treatment plant goes back downstream to be used again. You know, the old adage is water gets used 10 times or something before it leaves the valley, and that's a good thing. You know, the bad uses are the you know, what uses up our water, the consumptive uses that go on lawns and things that you don't get that back. It goes into the air. It still stays in the water cycle, but you know, it's falling as rain in another continent or something. So as far as shares go, so that lease from Tri-County is 10,000 acre feet out of the Ridgeway system. We also have 3,000, it depends on the year, depending on shares, but we have shares in the Cimarron system through Cimarron Canal Company, equivalent of about 2,000 to 3,000 acre feet of water also. That's primarily what we use to fill Cerro Reservoir, which is, you know, independent of the other Gunnison Tunnel Ridgeway system, but can feed into the treatment plant as necessary. Right now, we're currently using about 4,200 acre feet of total use per year from the city. So a lot of room to spare, you know, on normal years, and you know, there's various things we look at as far as vulnerabilities. You know, no water system is 100% secure, but relatively speaking, a decent cushion, you know, going into the years. And then looking at our kind of honing in deeper on Ridgeway, that's what we watch, because if it's doing good, that is the water that we rely on to exchange. This is the fill in 2021, this highlighted line here. So we started the year really low, but had a pretty good runoff, relatively speaking, and came to within 5 feet of full around the 4th of July, and are now, you know, there's irrigation diversions and stuff coming out of there, starting to drop. We're one of, you know, the M&I pool is shared, or is owned by Tri-County, we lease it, but there's also irrigation pools in there, there's some habitat pools, there's various pools of storage within the total 84,000 acre feet that makes up Ridgeway. You know, historically speaking, this year's fill, there's been worse. You know, you look at some of these years that fortunately they started higher, but they had pretty meager runoffs and didn't come up very much. You know, if you start low and you have one of these poor runoffs, and if you have that back to back, that's, I think, where we would be pretty vulnerable to where you'd be starting to get down low enough in Ridgeway that you'd be vulnerable.
And when that happens, Scott, if there wasn't enough water in Ridgeway, would our shares that we use to trade be cut back?
The comment I would make to that is the irrigation pool typically sits on top of that reservoir. There's also a firm yield pool that sits on top of that pool, 15,000 acre feet of water. So there's about 27,000 acre feet of wet water in that reservoir before you hit the municipal pool at 28.1. So we've never had a situation where we had to cut anybody's use or availability, either irrigation or municipal need, because of this firm yield pool which the Bureau of Reclamation reserved for themselves when that project was built. Non-allocated water is what we call it. And so we could see that allocation or non-allocated pool disappear or not be replenished by a runoff, and possibly get into that irrigation pool until that irrigation pool is gone, or at least they could take a cut potentially, But you got to remember also that there's 28,000 acre-feet of water in a 10,000 acre-foot demand or use by all of the 6 entities that use water. So there's some cushion there too. And where you set these things up and down into the reservoir is arbitrary, and certainly everybody has their own opinion on it. But Ridgeway is relatively easy to fill. That reservoir relatively easy to get to within that 15,000 acre-foot firm yield pool on any given year, and I don't know that we've ever not gotten there. I think the lowest we were was about 11,000 acre-feet short of filling that reservoir.
And that's a unique thing is, that's the only player on that as far as big reservoirs on that system. So, nothing's perfect, but our predecessors set us up pretty well, and I think you people in this room involved with the Dallas Creek project and stuff, that, you have a relatively decently sized basin and a relatively easy to fill reservoir. Not that it's guaranteed to fill, but, it's in the ability to transfer between basins and stuff. We're pretty uniquely positioned, and that's the work of a lot of great people before us that set us up well. So that's why we're talking about water, so we can carry that baton and do this right as we go into our next chapter. But so kind of focus on what the city is doing for the future. So we do have a water conservation plan website and some outreach associated with that. That does identify certain trigger levels if you start getting into critical supply issues or disruptions, when water restrictions start coming into play. This year we had the full pool, we had our full allocation. Water conservation is great, and we encourage that all the time, but we had a lot of people asking us, why don't you mandate water restrictions this year? Where our supply is fair and it's there, we didn't feel it was our place to push to force people to save something that to force it by law type thing. Obviously encouraged and is a best practice, and there's a lot of things we can do to make things more efficient going into the future, but that's a common question we get. Another thing we're doing, so my first 4 years here at Water Resources used to kind of be managed by different people over the years. I saw the need, asked that it get incorporated into my job description, so I'm officially the Water Resources Manager. As kind of the first step in that, in 2022 we're budgeting a project to do a comprehensive inventory of all of our resources, how they all kind of interact and work, and some of the vulnerabilities and limitations of them, because like Cerro for example, just because you have the shares without storage or without, depending on the time of year when you pull the water, may or may not be able to be utilized, things like that. We have a lot with the AMI system on the water, and current GIS tools. We have a lot better ability to do updated demand projections, so we can look through our water district and see how we look long range as growth continues in our water district, and then look at low-hanging fruit and kind of create plans for conservation. So some of the things that look like are some code revisions as they relate to land use, switching out non-essential turf, like decorative turf on some city properties and things, to xeriscaping, and these things don't happen overnight. These are just creating plans for the long range, changing over systems where possible to irrigation that may be on municipal water, things of that sort, to preserve that M&I pool and preserve the agricultural rights too. So it's important that if agricultural shares are present, they're getting used, so you don't lose them. And then let's see, and then Bill's been working with, we used to have a Parks Advisory Committee. They're expanding their scope to be a Natural Resources Advisory Committee to kind of help us take on and have some public engagement on some of these water plans, conservation plans, smart land use things going forward. We're at a pivot point, obviously. I think we're on our next big growth surge. So I think we have a duty to do it right and put things in place that will put our next generations in a good place with regard to water and not inhibit the potential of this valley. I'll turn over to Mike here. We participate in the Uncompahgre Valley Water and Land Use Committee. I didn't interact with Mike a lot until last year when we attended a week-long on Zoom. Just there ain't enough caffeine in the world. Sonoran Institute Growing Water Smart workshop. And through that was a lot of the people in this water and land use committee kind of really starting a lot of these conversations around water and where we're pointing, kind of planning to plan type stuff. Maybe I'll turn it over to you if you want to hit on that committee real quick.
Okay. Give you a little history on the talk about water and the water for our future. We did form a committee with the Uncompahgre Valley Water Users, the State Engineer's Office, and the Bureau of Reclamation back in 2013. We called it the Water for the Future Group, and the discussion was surrounded the water that comes through the Gunnison Tunnel out of the Gunnison River that serves the 84 5,000 acres of irrigated lands in this valley. And it's inevitable, in my opinion, that someday those lands will be converted from an ag use to some other use, whether it be industrial, commercial, municipal. And that conversion is going to be very important. How we do that and how we make that happen to preserve the rights that we have, the Uncompahgre Valley Water Users has in the Gunnison River into perpetuity. Very important. The U.S. owns, and Marc knows more about this than I do, the U.S. owns that water right that's diverted out of that Gunnison Tunnel, out of the Gunnison River, and the federal government probably has the right to do with it what they want. And so the fear around here is that if we don't use that water to a beneficial use or as smart as we can, we could possibly lose it into the future when Southern California is out of water or Lake Mead goes dry. Those kinds of things I don't think are out of the realm of possibility, but of course a lot of controversy surrounds that. So Water for the Future Group has been talking about that. We're talking about conversion of that water from an ag to a municipal or industrial commercial use. We're also talking about what we could do out into the future to make a beneficial use. For instance, 40 acres of corn turns into 40 acres of houses. What can we do to convert that water so that it can be used indoor and outdoor? And then how could we preserve that into the future? Any savings that you have in a municipal setting, how you could save that water into the future for potentially for the irrigation of the crops and the growers around here that use that water. Marc will tell you that they've never had enough water, and they've never had 100% of the amount of water they had a right to use on each and every acre. And so going into the future, any uses up front that might be preserved will probably be used by the irrigators for some time, and then when that conversion overtakes the demand from irrigation or the irrigators, then you can see some of that water maybe come back. And I don't know what that time frame looks like, but it's very important that we set the stage, and that's what we're doing right now. We set the stage for that conversion out into the future to make sure that the federal government sees us as a very efficient and beneficial use. One thing that you should be aware of, the 28,200 acre foot pool, 28,100 acre foot municipal industrial pool in Ridgeway is a finite amount of water. And we use about 9,000 to 10,000 acre feet depending on the year right now. And my message to the Tri-County Water Board has always been, that's a finite amount of water. We will ultimately use it all. What are we going to do then? And so that's why we're talking about these things with the Water for the Future Group. The Water and Land Committee was a committee that evolved from this Water for the Future discussion. And we assembled a bunch of stakeholders, the counties, the cities, the towns in this valley, to start the conversation about water use, water and land use policies, and how important they are to one another, and the fact that they're intertangled and twined, and we have to make smart land use decisions given water, and the water use policymakers have to make good decisions about water concerning land. And so that conversation has started, and we have, I would say, 20 stakeholders in the room from all sorts of interests in water, and we hope to take that to the city councils and the Montrose or the county commissions. We hope to provide to them a group of experts in the area of water and land use, so that if we do have a problem, we do have an issue, and we want to make a smart choice going forward, you have a committee, in my opinion, that is an expert on the subject and subjects of water and land use, and those people can help us make better decisions going in the future. I think the one big thing that this valley has that a lot of them don't is that we are a community from the top of Red Mountain Pass to the confluence of the Uncompahgre River at Gunnison. And all of those people are in the room talking about it. What happens in the lower basin affects the upper basin. What happens in the upper basin affects the lower basin. And so that talk across county lines and across city boundaries, I think, is real important going into the future. And that Water and Land Committee is a forum for that conversation. So I would be happy to answer any questions.
I got one more slide.
Okay?
Yeah, Mike's spot on. That's exactly how I view that committee. Is, you know, we're kind of working on our bubble, but we want to make sure that it aligns with the larger picture, because, you know, I think Powell's the one that said jurisdictional boundaries should be by watershed, but that obviously didn't win. But what we do and what they do definitely affect each other, and the resource also. So if, you know, if we're going into uncharted territory, they've been there and can help us. So yeah, this is where I wanted to focus most of the discussion on is what the future may hold. So, you know, we do have room for Montrose growth, but there is reason to proceed cautiously given the larger Colorado River issues. We're very much into unprecedented territory on, you know, for the 40 million people that rely on the Colorado River, and what that's going to look like going into the future. And I hope maybe Marc knows. I don't know. That'd be cool. Somebody knew. The shortages are here to stay. So, you know, the high use, yeah, there's just plain a lot of people, a lot of consumptive uses, people looking to expand the use, and then, you know, for the foreseeable future, it looks like supply is looking to drop. This is a heat map actually of temperature change from 1895 to 2018. Studies have shown for every 1 degree, you know, Western Colorado and Eastern Utah are a kind of anomaly hotspot where we've had relatively high temperature increase over those times. And these are just climate records. I'm not going into the politics of climate change or anything, but this is just data. Studies have shown for every 1 degree, you see a 3 to 8% reduction in flow on the Colorado River. So, you know, 5 degrees, 15% low end, that's still a lot of water on an already over-allocated system. You know, so with that shortage here to stay, the major challenge is how do you divvy up the Colorado River shortage equitably without putting a target on, you know, the easy, you know, the target naturally kind of seems to sit on agriculture a lot because they're a large user, large percentage, but that doesn't mean it's fair to go after them. And then, you know, they say water flows uphill towards money. How will politics play into that? You know, the big powerful urban centers, things of that sort. Major uncertainties. So, you know, they do a call on they've never had to do a call on the upper basin to where they call at least very, you know, you're not meeting your obligation, you have to hit it, you know, under the prior appropriation system. That means you start shutting off headgates. Well, some of those junior rights are trans-basin diversions to the Front Range or something, you know. How's that going to go? And there's laws and nuances to all of that, but you know, simple way of saying it's messy and we're in uncharted territory and there's a lot to figure out. You may start to see state mandates, and I was wondering if Marc knew of anything that might be coming down the pipe. So a good example are you know, like conservation mandates that just came through, and I think Nevada did it, where, you know, they banned all non-essential turf things of that sort. You know, you might see something like that. Not saying it's coming, but you know, something has to be done at a larger level, whether it be federal or state is unknown. But and I think you'll also see and I think this is a good thing, a culture change around water use, and that's a good thing, to where people start understanding that, you know, if this grass, you know, parks are important. You need places to play. I'm not saying dry up parks, but you know, if it's merely decorative and you can do it with xeriscaping, use a lot less water, and preserve water. Every drop of water preserved for agriculture and high in the basin is a good thing for our community. So if that can be preserved and people want to, because that's, you know, people have to want to do it, that's a good thing, and that would be a good thing for us. So I think, you know, generationally you'll see, you know, culture change over time, and we want to do that also. We want to foster that change and do the right thing as a city moving forward, that we are good stewards of these resources also, and there are opportunities out there for improvement, definitely within, you know, our sphere of influence. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to questions, and Mark, I'd love to hear his take on the world these days.
We've had some problems with people buying up land in order just to get the water rights. Are we still having that difficulty? And I think, has there been some laws passed to help that?
Well, thank you for having me here today. I appreciate it. Quickly, before I answer that question, there is some good news. And you can see it happening right now. The culture is changing. City councils are sitting here talking about how can we change the culture in our community. Our kids are going to the water fair. Been doing that for 20 years, I think. So the culture is slowly shifting, and I think that's one of the things we have to keep in mind, is culture is not going to change tomorrow unless you issue a mandate or unless you say that this is not legal anymore. So I see that happening. You know, the State of the River is a meeting that the Colorado River District puts on. When I worked for the water users, there might be 12 people there. Today we have 65 to 90 to come and find out what's going on the Uncompahgre River and on the Gunnison River. So that's an indication that it's on people's minds. We are making progress with that. The time to think about the future is now. And that's evident that you are. You know, your department chairs are thinking about what's coming. So that's good news. Keep it up. Keep pushing it, because we're probably not going to be able to back off from that because of the number of people in the West, the way the weather acts. So we've got to be thinking about it. To answer your question, there are New York City hedge funds buying land in the Gunnison, or in the Colorado River Basin right there at Grand Junction. I think their holdings today are something like 2,500 acres. They're buying it saying that they want to own some farm ground. And there are a lot of people investing in farm ground around the country today. The bonus for that is that it also has good water rights. The difference between that irrigation company and this irrigation company is their shares are not necessarily tied to that piece of land. The water in this basin, in the Uncompahgre Valley Water Users Association, is tied to the specific acre that water goes to. So you can't sell off the water and keep the land, or you can't sell off the land and keep the water to go rent it to somebody else. So yes, and I'm going to be in a hearing on the 24th and the 25th in Steamboat Springs in regards to some strengthening the anti-speculation aspects of our Constitution. It is illegal to hold water if it does not have a beneficial use. You can't hold it in speculation that there's going to be a market for it at someplace down the road. You can't file for a water right. So what we're finding now is that the investors have decided there are ways around that. And that's what they're attempting to do on some of these investments. One of the things you have to keep in mind is in order to do that, they'll have to go through a change of use hearing to take it from agriculture to something else. That's when the community gets an opportunity to say we will be injured, particularly other water right holders. There may need to be some changes as we go down the road about who are the injured parties. And there's some looking at that today. So for example, at some point there may be an opportunity for the city of Montrose to step into one of those change use account or cases and say the city's being impacted. Because every acre of irrigated ground has economic activity of around $300 to $500 an acre. If I don't farm, those $300 don't come to Main Street. And if they don't come to the producers co-op, they lay a guy off, they don't buy as many shoes, and it just cascades down Main. Those are some of the things that we're looking at in regards to the demand management plan, which I'm sure you've heard plenty of, or maybe not. So right now, what's moving water from Blue Mesa and Flaming Gorge and Navajo is part of what's known as the drought contingency plan. Can we do that? So we're attempting to move 185,000 acre feet from those reservoirs into Lake Powell to raise the level to give us another cushion in regards to that 3525 elevation. The 3525 elevation in reality today is probably the calling structure rather than a call to go up the river. You know, a compact call is going to be an incredibly complex deal that by the time it gets settled in court, the reservoirs will be empty. Don't you think? So, I mean, everybody's standing up right now trying to get themselves ready, because remember when that compact was signed, Arizona brought their National Guard to the boundaries and shot cannons over at California because they didn't like the way it was being done. Well, that hadn't changed. We just have better cannons today. And, you know, so, yeah, it's a mess. But I think one of the ways through this is each community taking a look at what they're going to do for themselves. What you and I do here in Montrose is not going to make a great big difference down there in Lake Powell. But it could make a big difference for us forestalling those problems and putting them down the road 5 years from now. That's good planning. That's good business. And, you know, I liken these reservoirs to, you know, to a savings account. One of the things you have is the reservoir up at Taylor Park. That's 1/3 of the water that the Uncompahgre is going to use. That was needed to make it a functional irrigation district. It's for late season to sweeten the river so there's enough water here. You benefit from that too, because when that water gets put in the river, your diversions are made into Fairview. Everybody's benefiting from the way this system works. The people 100 years ago had a great vision of the future. The only thing that they missed was the number of people. Truly, the system works exactly the way it was laid out, and it continues to do that. What's wrong with it today is it's still earthen-lined canals, and they seep and they leak, and a new technical term, thievage. You know, people just put a pump in there and say, hell, it's free, I'm going to get it. But those are the things that we're working on. We started piping the east side of the Uncompahgre Valley, and I think today that the delivery systems on that side of the basin are at about 120 miles of pipe. That's nearly the whole east side. That keeps water from leaking and seeping out of those laterals and down into the groundwater, picking up the salt, the selenium that takes it to the Uncompahgre, which causes us a bad reputation downstream. We are winning on that. not only are we cutting the pollution, but we're firming our supply. Because we don't have to put water in those ditches to feed the willows and to feed the granddaddy cottonwoods and all those things. So we're saving an amazing amount of water there. If it's being, I don't think that anybody is trying to quantify it, but water you save there allows you to move that water to the west side where the gravel and the rocks and all of those kind of things. That's the reason out there it's delivered 5 acre-feet of water. And in the adobes, it's 4 acre-feet of water because they don't use as much, but they seep. They have problems with that. So that's a real positive that's happening. And you know, there'll be some improvements in irrigation because of those pipes. Pressurizing that water coming down off the hill will make sprinklers much more adaptable. The growth in the Uncompahgre is something that, you know, we can't stop. But I do think with this Land and Water Committee, they are looking at how are we going to do this. If we take the water off of agriculture, and we say, okay, they're only going to need half as much for that subdivision for their irrigation of their plots. That other half may be an asset that can be worked with for Montrose and the Tri-County. I mean, what we're talking about on the eastern slope is buy and dry. Okay? $75,000 an acre foot out of the Colorado Big Thompson first channel that they put through the mountain. Think about that. We're all billionaires here. There's a lot of water in this basin, and that's the reason that this is such a great place to live. So I think as time moves forward and markets change and demands change, you'll see some of those kind of things happen from the water users to Tri-County, from Tri-County to the city, and we will stay in front of that. Now, there are a lot of opportunities for it to just crash, but we won't be the only people that are hurt. Because the lower basin will scream bloody murder before that ever happens. Right now, California uses about 1 million acre-feet more than what they're allocated. And, you know, one of the things to remember is that 1 acre-foot of water will supply a family of 5 for a year. So there's probably more than a million people there that are needing that water. They got to service it. So we'll figure about that. The structural demand in Lake Powell has just continued to take it down. We do need more water, there's no doubt. But one of the things that we're doing right now is we're looking at ways we can do that. I bring this up quickly so I don't take too much of your time. Demand management is where the system, it hasn't been defined yet by the state of Colorado or anybody else, will come to the agricultural community and say, we want you to leave so many acres of land vacant, fallowed. We will pay you X number of dollars for the water that you leave in the river system. I'm a believer, and the River District has had this study. Mike Berry sat on that committee for demand management. They put in an amazing amount of work. They turned out a great product. We will be using it from the River District in relationship to talking to the state of Colorado how this should be set up. Because the first thing is we don't want it to happen on the western slope and only the western slope. Trans-mountain diversions need to make a deposit into the Colorado River as much as we do. No matter how hard they bellyache and beller and have a fit. But that needs to happen. We will probably need to contribute to that to a certain degree, but at those meetings is where we need you. Because you keep track of the sales tax, you keep track of the revenue, you keep track of the facts and the figures. We keep track of yield. So it's going to be a community work, believe me. And we'll keep you informed so that you'll know when those kind of meetings happen and those kind of things. But what they're saying is demand management needs to be voluntary, tell me those words. Compensated and who knows. But that's the point. We cannot continue to do temporary fixes if the climate is changing permanently. And that's what we're focusing on right now, is a temporary fix for something that might be permanent. The time to talk about where are we going to put this saved water is now. There's a 500,000 acre pool in Lake Powell to move this water there. The first thing my dad told me when I started irrigating for him is don't let any water get off the hill. And that's kind of how I feel about don't let any water get out of Colorado unless we know where it's at, who gets the benefit, and how it's going to be managed and those kind of things. Because Colorado is still the linchpin and the key to what's happening on the Colorado River. It starts it. So, you know, everybody's working on it. I want you to know that. Everybody is working on it. And the community here is working on it. You guys are talking about it. Water users are talking about it. They're trying to save water out there in those laterals. And believe me, that's working. That truly is. That's really the lowest hanging fruit for water conservation in the state of Colorado today, is modernizing the delivery systems that are 100 to 120 years old. You know, concrete lining, polyester or poly lining, those kind of things need to be looked at. These guys are doing that. I think you're going to see a lot more of that. Because when you suffer 20 to 30% seepage loss, you can't afford to run water in that raw soil. So I think you're going to see a lot of that. If the state of Colorado is serious about it, they need to make some of those grants available. They need to make programs available. Today in Colorado, you cannot get a grant from the state of Colorado simply for water conservation. You can get one for salt, you can get one for pollution, but you can't get one for simply conserving water. It's a complex deal. The reason it's complex is who owns the saved water. And, you know, we'll answer that. You know,
Marc,
the state thinks they do. So.
When you look at the farming in the Colorado River Basin, it's all pretty much of a very dry, arid area. Do you see any changes in that area, utilizing some of the irrigation techniques that they've done in the Middle East, where they're very short of water? Are we looking at, rather than just flooding stuff, going with different types?
Well, we still irrigate the same way we did when Caesar was a baby.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yes, there are lots of things being brought to bear. If you go out and take a drive here in the Uncompahgre Valley, east of or west of Montrose and west of Olathe and Delta, most of the onions that are raised on underground irrigation systems. So they put water in those pipes, the pipes ooze, and they irrigate that crop. That's a great way to do it. It's expensive, but for a high value crop like onions, that makes a lot of sense. We will see, I think, more side rolls and some of those kind of things as time goes forward. But they're so expensive, they have to be helped by the system that's going to benefit from that saved water. Because a guy can't just make that investment just because I'm a good neighbor. You know, now you can have my water. They can't do that. But I think you'll see some of those things happen because it's on everybody's mind. When we talk about culture change, that's one of the things that's happening. The culture is shifting. People think about it differently. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know you guys have got a lot to do. But I'll answer any question you've got, or I'll try.
I really don't have a question, but more of a comment. I assume most of us know that we're very lucky to have Marc in the State House with his knowledge of water, and recently appointed, I believe, as chair of, what's the full name of the committee?
I was appointed vice chair of the Ag, Water, and Natural Resources Committee.
And I think what's notable about that is the fact that that is normally reserved for a person in the majority party, and so this was something fairly unique, and so congratulations.
Thank you very much.
I am curious, just curious, about, so we have a shift in population, obviously, that's going on right now, between California, even Arizona, some of these places that are drying up into Colorado. Has there been a study done on the shift of one person from those arid areas to here and what that means to water in general and how much it really conserves?
Still net positive in the basin. There is some moving around within the basins, but I think the demand for people coming to the west and the watershed as a whole is huge. And net.
20 years ago, when Mike and I were running our respective organizations, the Bureau of Reclamation did a study, and I thought it was crazy. It said the growth area was going to be in the Intermountain West, and that California was going to lose some, the coast was going to lose some, but they were going to be up here. And, I thought, oh, man, well, here we are. They're here. I mean, I'm going to go find that study. It's got to be somewhere and see if I can reread it. It might give me some ideas to what to do next. There are those things happening. It does shift a number of things because the water that comes from your town into that river down at the plant is inventory water for people on down. When we went to Southern California to study the Colorado River, we got down there to Imperial, California, and they told us there were 119 sewer plants on the Colorado River from where we were to where we'd taken off from. So those uses and reuses are going to be a big deal. The other thing that I see, Ag's been using and reusing water forever. This system was built on that. The inventory water that comes into this basin is enough to irrigate 32,000 acres at one time. We're irrigating nearly 80,000 acres today because we pick it up, we use it. It's in that side of the system, it's used about 5 to 7 times before it goes back in. So one of the things that I see happening in cities is purple pipe, where they use that water, raw water, and take it back to their parks and to those open, and one of the things you're going to hear, and you're going to hear it a lot, is that the urbanites want to talk about their environment, the trees, the grasses, all those things, because that's part of the environment they live in. So we're going to probably have to talk about it. But use and reuse may be part of that answer. The other thing, and this is part of the good news, is that we have a lot of technology. The problem with the technology is it costs so much electricity to run. Desals, those kind of things are going to be part of our future. There's no doubt about that. And, because sooner or later you run out of surface water. So you're going to have to do something. And that's where I think we're going to head. As long as we don't run fresh water out of California to desalinate the smelt, that hurts. Because they had 5 years of storage in that before this started to happen, and now they're out. Because they tried to do these kind of things rather than taking care of that savings account. And culture will change that, I'm sure.
Mayor, can
Yes.
I make one more point on the Water and Land Committee? I want to thank Scott for being an active member. I've got 60 people on that email list, and I've got 15, maybe 20 active members, and Scott's one of them. He's got an interest lately, in the last year and a half or so. And I think he's a key to the future of this group. I think staffing to counties and cities and all the governments that that operate our communities here are the key to the success of this Water and Land Committee. And so I would appeal to this council for your future support through your staff on what this Water and Land Committee could do. And we don't have any real definite direction yet, but we're working on that. And I think when we get that strategic plan written and we develop a plan going forward, we're probably going to need some funding. And I think everybody's going to have to pitch in for that group to be successful out into the future. But I want to thank Scott for diving in and really helping the group.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been enjoyable. One more thing to get excited about. It's water.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Okay.